Superman is strong. Thanos is tough. But in the deep lore of comics, there are beings that treat entire universes like marbles. We're ranking the entities that break the laws of physics just by existing. Welcome to the Infinite Ladder. Today, we aren't asking who punches the hardest. We're asking a much scarier question. Who owns the scoreboard?
Hold on. If we're talking power, we have to start with physics. There's a famous Superman moment where he's described as essentially bench pressing a machine set to the mass of the Earth for days. That's the peak. You can't get stronger than moving a planet.
And that is exactly what we call the Superman problem. Physical scaling has a ceiling. Superman can be the apex of matter and motion in that lane. But the beings we're ranking today, they don't play the same sport. They're the boot.
Exactly. You can't punch a concept. You can't put a headlock on the idea of Tuesday. If your opponent can delete gravity, your bench press record becomes trivia.
Take Mr. Mxyzptlk. He was created for Superman number 30, 1944. He's a fifth-dimensional imp. To him, our universe is a toy he can fold and refold. Superman can't beat him with muscle. He usually has to trick him into saying his own name backwards.
Okay, but that's just magic tricks. It's a gimmick.
It's not a gimmick. It's admin access. Look at the Emperor Joker storyline. The Joker tricks Mxyzptlk into giving him nearly all his power, and then reality turns into a nightmare he can rewrite on a whim. Superman can't punch the universe back to normal when the rules of punching have been rewritten.
Precisely. Or consider Doomsday Clock number 12, on sale December 18th, 2019. It isn't a simple fistfight between Superman and Dr. Manhattan. It's a confrontation between someone who acts inside time and someone who can treat time like a diagram. And for a modern example, the 2024 event Absolute Power shows how quickly raw strength stops mattering when powers can be neutralized or drained at scale. Strength is a variable. Reality warping is the ability to edit the code.
So, Superman is absurdly strong, but on our ladder, he's only Tier 3. He's the peak of physics. Now, let's meet the things that break it.
All right, let's get serious. We are entering Tier 3. This is where physics starts screaming for mercy. But, and this is crucial, it hasn't left the building yet.
So this is the heavy hitters, the planet busters.
Exactly. But planet buster is a lazy term. Are we talking about burning off the atmosphere? Or are we talking about unbinding the planet? Because there is a massive difference. To actually unbind Earth, to overcome its gravity so it never comes back together, you're looking at roughly 2 × 10 to the 32 joules.
Okay, I stopped listening at joules. Give me a comparison.
Think of the Tsar Bomba, the biggest nuke humans ever detonated. That nuke is a firecracker compared to this. To unbind a planet, you need on the order of a week's worth of the sun's total energy output, focused on one rock. That is the baseline for Tier 3.
And comics love to play right at that line. Take Thor issue 380, the Midgard serpent, Jormungand. The story frames the serpent as wrapping around the entire Earth. When it flexes, the planet shudders. It's a physical creature exerting planetary scale force.
Right, it's terrifying, sure, but it's still mass. It's still leverage. It's still physics. If you have enough force, you can fight it.
Okay, but what about when things get weirder, like in JLA number 77? Superman literally holds a black hole in his hand.
I love that one. The issue calls it a black hole no bigger than a speck of dust, contained by a magnetic field. In real physics, dust-sized is a trap. A black hole with the mass of a dust speck would be far smaller than an atom. while a black hole with an event horizon the size of dust would have a ludicrous mass and gravity. Either way, without containment, you don't hold it, you have a catastrophe.
It's a containment feat. Superman isn't rewriting gravity. He's keeping it under control while the field does the heavy lifting.
Precisely. It's an energy budget problem. Tier 3 is just a numbers game. Whether it's the Hulk in his world-breaker era causing earthquakes with his footsteps, or a supernova cannon.
So if you can crack a planet, you're at the top of the food chain.
Not even close. You're just the biggest fish in the aquarium.
That's the key. Tier 3 beings can destroy the tank, but they are still in the tank.
Think about it. You can have infinite strength. You can punch with the force of 1 trillion exploding suns. But what happens if your opponent simply deletes the concept of punching? That is the hard ceiling of Tier 3. Physical power is just output. It doesn't grant permission. And the next tier, they don't care about your output. They own the permissions.
Welcome to Tier 2. This is where we leave biology behind entirely. In Tier 3, we talked about beings who can break a planet. In Tier 2, we are talking about the beings who decide what a planet is allowed to be.
Wait, so we're done with punching? I feel like we skipped a step. What about Galactus? He's huge. He eats worlds. He's definitely stronger than Superman.
Galactus is actually the perfect doorman for this tier. He isn't just a big alien in a funny hat. Marvel stories often treat him like a cosmic constant, a necessary force in the universe's balance. But he's still the physical worker. Above him are the abstracts, entities that personify fundamentals: time, space, death, chaos.
Hold on, you're saying time is a character? Like the ticking clock has a personality? That sounds like a metaphor, not a power level.
In comics, the metaphor is the power. Take Marvel's Eternity, first mentioned in Strange Tales number 134, 1965, and first appearing in Strange Tales number 138, 1965. Eternity isn't a wizard who casts time spells. He's the living embodiment of the universe itself, the cosmic whole. If you punch him, you're not punching a guy.
Okay, but does he have feats? Can he blast things?
His feat is existing. If the embodiment of the universe fails, the universe fails with it. But if you want authority, look at the Living Tribunal. First appearing in Strange Tales number 157, 1967, it's basically the Supreme Court of Marvel's multiverse. It doesn't have to brawl, you get judged. If it rules you're a cosmic violation, the verdict can be reality itself, saying no.
So it's bureaucracy. You're telling me the second strongest tier in fiction is just cosmic administration?
Exactly. It's the operating system. You can't outmuscle the source code. And it gets darker. Meet Oblivion. Oblivion is the personification of nothingness, debuting in Iceman, 1984, number 1. In Marvel terms, it's tied to the outer void. Not an enemy you can outpunch, but the idea of non-existence wearing a face. You don't kill it like a boss fight. You're arguing with the void.
That sounds unbeatable. If I can't touch him, how do I win?
You don't. You negotiate. Or you hope he ignores you. DC Comics takes this even further with The Endless.
The Neil Gaiman characters from the TV show?
The very same. In The Sandman number 8, 1989, we meet Death not as a grim reaper, but as a warm, casual presence. But make no mistake, she isn't a god powered by belief. She's the function of life ending. In the story's own terms, she'll be there at the very end, then shut the place down and lock up behind her.
So, if Superman tried to fight Death of the Endless,
he would eventually die. Not because she beat him up, but because dying is what living things do, and she is that rule. It's a category error. It's like trying to checkmate a thunderstorm.
I hate to admit it, but that actually makes sense. If you are the law of physics, you don't need muscles. But wait, if these things define reality, who tells them what to do?
Now you're asking the right question. Marvel's Gods, launched in 2023, plays with the idea that reality runs on competing orders, the rules behind the rules. And rules can be rewritten.
Rewritten? By who?
By the cheaters, the hackers, the beings who don't just manage the universe, they edit it. We are moving up to Tier 1.
Welcome to the deep end. We are leaving physics behind entirely. If Tier 3 is about who hits the hardest, and Tier 2 is about who controls the laws of nature, Tier 1 is something else. It's about who can rewrite the laws. Think about it like a video game. Super strength is a high damage stat. Reality warping? That's admin access.
Hold on, that sounds less like a fight and more like cheating. If I can just delete you, where is the conflict? How do you even measure that?
You don't measure it, you survive it. Or you don't. Imagine a classic powerhouse charging at you. In Tier 3, you brace for impact. In Tier 1, somebody says a sentence and the rules of the scene change. A planet never exploded. A power source never existed. Gravity is now made of pudding. The fight ends before it begins.
That isn't an exaggeration. We have canon receipts for exactly that kind of scale. In Marvel's House of M number 7, published in October 2005, the Scarlet Witch rewrites reality and delivers the infamous 3 words: "No more mutants."
And just like that, the game changed. It wasn't a battle, it was a patch. In the aftermath, the number of mutants still powered drops to around 198 on the books, with later stories sometimes treating the true number as a bit higher.
Precisely. Another prime example is the Infinity Gauntlet. Marvel's own description for Infinity Gauntlet number 1, July 1991, puts it bluntly: with it came omnipotence. Comics use that word loosely, but the framing is clear. Thanos wasn't just strong, he had the combined power of the 6 Infinity Gems: time, space, mind, soul, reality, and power.
Okay, I get the artifact angle. You find the cheat code, you win. But what about the beings who are the cheat code?
Enter the Beyonder. In the original Secret Wars 1984, he abducts a roster of heroes and villains and drops them onto Battleworld, a planet he constructs by stitching together pieces of other worlds. His whole vibe is basically, nothing you dream is impossible. When you're playing at that scale, Galactus tier problems stop being threats and start being props.
But even the Beyonder is still playing a role inside the story. If you want the true peak of Tier 1, you have to go meta. This is where the characters realize they're in a comic book.
This is my favorite part, the fourth wall break. We all know She-Hulk or Deadpool doing it for laughs, but when it's weaponized, it's terrifying.
A definitive moment is DC's Animal Man number 26, released July 1990. Buddy Baker literally steps out of the panels and meets his writer, Grant Morrison.
Think about the power dynamic there. Buddy can fly. He can borrow animal powers. But the person at the desk controls the page. If the writer decides Buddy never existed, there is no fight to win.
Marvel has a similar concept called the House of Ideas. In Defenders Beyond number 5, November 23, 2022, the characters actually enter it, a blank conceptual space framed as the source where stories and possibilities become canon.
And they're still playing with that in recent books. In Gwenpool number 1, May the 14th, 2025, Marvel even pitches her as a reality twister again. And in 2025, Marvel and DC literally did Deadpool Batman and Batman Deadpool one-shots. When characters understand the medium, the panels, the narration, the crossover machinery, they stop fighting the villain and start fighting the plot.
I hate that this makes sense. You're saying the strongest power isn't physics or magic, it's narrative authority.
Exactly. Tier 1 can hack the system. They can rewrite the code, but someone still owns the system.
And that brings us to the end of the ladder. If Tier 1 are the hackers, Tier 0 are the architects. The ones who don't just edit the page, they wrote the blank page in the first place.
We have reached the ceiling. If Tier 1 is about hacking the simulation, Tier 0 is the developer. At this level, we are no longer talking about characters who fight. We are talking about the entities that define what a fight even is.
So this is it, the top of the food chain. Who are they?
In every cosmology, there is a source. Within the DC framework, that role is often associated with the presence. In the Spectre's very first story, a disembodied entity referred to as the Voice sends Jim Corrigan back as the Spectre in More Fun Comics number 52, cover dated February 1940.
Wait, you said voice. So this isn't a guy in a cape punching asteroids.
Correct. The presence doesn't punch, it simply is. Over at Marvel, the closest equivalent is usually called the One Above All. A good meta-example is Fantastic Four, Volume 3, number 511, cover dated May 2004, released March 17, 2004. The team reaches heaven and meets a creator figure shown as a comic artist at a drawing board.
That sounds like cheating. If they created the universe, they can just delete the bad guy, right?
In story, they can rewrite the rules the bad guy depends on. That is why they are Tier 0. But there is one layer even higher, the authorial layer.
You mean the actual writer? Like the person collecting a paycheck?
Precisely. Comics have acknowledged this. Look at Animal Man number 26, cover dated August 1990. The main character walks out of the story and meets his writer on the page. It's the cleanest proof that the ultimate power in fiction isn't heat vision or magic.
So the winner of who is the most powerful superhero is a writer on a deadline?
That's where every power ranking breaks. Once you're in the authorial layer, who wins is whatever the story needs.
I hate that. But I can't argue with the logic. You can't win a fight against the guy who decides if you exist.
So we've climbed the whole ladder, from people who can crack a planet in half, all the way to beings who treat the multiverse like a sketch pad.
It really comes down to 4 words. Tier 3 is punching, Tier 2 is principles, Tier 1 is permissions, and Tier 0? That's the pen.
I can't believe I'm saying this, but the logic actually tracks. If you can rewrite thermodynamics, you don't need muscles. You change the rules of the fight.
Okay, give it to me straight. No ties. Who is the absolute winner?
If we stay strictly inside publisher canons, we have 2 answers. In Marvel, the top is The One Above All, Fantastic Four, 1998, number 511. Literally bills him as the creator of everything. In DC, it usually traces back to the presence, introduced as the disembodied voice that empowers the Spectre in More Fun Comics number 52, February 1940.
But if you go meta,
then the winner is the authorial layer itself. Grant Morrison wrote himself into Animal Man 1988 series number 26, 1990, to tell the main character to his face that his life is fiction. That's the ceiling. You can't beat the person writing your dialogue.
And this isn't just ancient history, right? Marvel and DC started crossing over again in 2025, and it's continuing into 2026. The hierarchy is always shifting. So, The strongest superhero isn't Superman. The strongest supervillain isn't Thanos. The strongest entity is the one holding the pen. Thanks for climbing the ladder with us.
See you in the next issue.